steal it.
Okay, I think we'll just let people filter in, but we're going to start because we want to sort of blaze through this presentation so that half of this evening is the presentation and half is devoted to your questions. So welcome. Thank you, those of you who are here with us tonight and those watching at home on Channel 79. This is going to be a fairly basic primer on our town government. This is not a forum to discuss specific issues. This is all about who does what and how they do it. So that by the time you leave here tonight, you will have a sense of who you need to contact, or better still, how you can plug in to the system in order to contribute to the community. I'm Mickey Porta. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of New Canaan, and it's our mission to engage citizens in the political process. And what that means is that we're a political organization, but we are a nonpartisan organization. So our group of women, and a couple of men too, work across political affiliations, in some cases no political affiliation, on local issues that affect New Canaan. So tonight, what we're going to cover, we're going to break it down into three areas. The first, we're going to run through boards and commissions. And Kit Devereaux, who's a selectman, and Tom Stadler, who is our town administrative officer, are going to break that down for us. Now, because the town government is so broad, it's a very dynamic thing. We're not going to cover every single board and commission. We're going to cover the ones that seem to be getting the most action right now. Second is Krista Canaan, who's a member of our town council, and Krista's going to talk about how ideas go from beginning to end, how an idea really is adopted. And then finally, Beth Jones, who is head of the Democratic Town Committee, but has served in so many capacities, there's really too many to name. Beth is going to tell us specifically how we can get involved, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an undecided voter. So let's kick it off with Kit and Tom.
Okay, so hi, I'm Kit, and going to talk about the boards and commissions. And basically, there's two ways to serve. You can either be elected or you can be appointed. And the elected positions are elected at the end of terms in November. They have varying term lengths, and that includes the Board of Selectmen, Town Council, and the Board of Education. Appointed positions, and most of the boards and commissions are appointed. They too have varying term lengths, and appointments are made when the terms expire or someone leaves. And some are appointed by the Board of Selectmen. Some, but not all, require town council approval, and one is appointed by the town council. The Board of Selectmen is at the top of the town government, and there are 3 members. They serve 2-year terms. The first selectman is like the mayor, and then there's a Board of Selectmen, and it is by charter that they have to be called men rather than select women. And in the past, they were called the second and third selectmen. Now, having done this for a while, it turns out that what being on the Board of Selectmen really is you vote, you talk about, discuss, debate even, and then vote on matters that are on the agenda that the first selectman sets. And the first selectman, who is like the mayor, controls that agenda. The board as a whole decides things like contracts and projects and appointments to boards and commissions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on. I'm Tom Stadler, your administrative officer for the past 9 years. And before that, I was 40 years in the private sector. But this is more fun. We talk about the town council now. Kit told you about the Board of Selectmen. That's the executive branch of the government. The town council, think of it as the legislative branch. It's our Congress, so to speak. They make the laws, they make the bylaws, they make the ordinances for our town. There's 12 members. They're all elected, and they have 4-year terms, and they're staggered terms. They don't all come on at once. And as I said, they do the bylaws and the ordinances for the town. They're also responsible overall for property. If we're going to deal with buildings, if we're going to deal with land and things like that, they come into play there. Think of them as the last stop. And if we have a budget process, the budget runs through the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance stops at the town council. If we have a collective bargaining agreement that might start in the schools, it might start in the police department or public works, works its way through the various boards, it ends up at the town council. They're like the final vote on things. They appoint our auditor. They approve the audit at the end of every year. They confirm various committees. For example, the Board of Selectmen will appoint some Board of Finance members, Ethics Board members, the Audit Committee members, and they have to be confirmed then by the town council. They can't, it's not enough that just the Board of Selectmen would appoint them. So the town council only appoints one board that I'm aware of ever in the 9 years I've been here, and that is the Affordable Housing, the Housing Authority, the Affordable Housing Group. They appoint them directly. That's their responsibility, not the Board of Selectmen. And I think I covered just about everything else. It's our legislative branch.
And then we have the Board of Finance, and that's kind of like the triad, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the Town Council. The Board of Education is just as important, but it has a different function. The Board of Finance, there are 8 members, and they're appointed for 4-year terms. There are also 3 alternates, and they serve 2-year terms. And the alternates are seated whenever someone is absent. They're always welcome to join in the conversation, but they can't vote unless they're seated. Then they review all the money that is spent is approved by the Board of Finance. And they also recommend what the tax rate will be, what we call the mill rate. And they recommend what expenses are going to be bonded. In the past, the first selectman used to chair the Board of Finance, but a couple of years ago that was changed because although the Board of Selectmen votes on appointments to the Board of Finance, really it's the first selectman who decides who's going to be put on the agenda to be voted on. So the fact that the same person would be appointing the people that sit on the board as it's just best practices not to have that chair be the same person that appoints them. So they now elect their own chair. We're in our 2nd year of that, and so far so good. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think you got most of it.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the 4th and final board that we want to talk about is the Board of Education, a very, very important board in this town. They, excuse me, they are elected members, elected by the public. They serve a 4-year term, and they run the schools. I mean, they come to the town for money. They need, I think the budget this year is somewhere around 90 million plus or minus, out of 140 maybe. They come to the town for the money, but once they have the money, they'll go run the schools. They're responsible for the operations of the schools, and they report more or less directly to the state. There's a lot of state rules and regulations and statutes that kind of govern how the schools are run. On the other side of the coin, they are responsible for the operations of the school. The capital side of the school resides on the town side. So if they want to build a parking lot or build another school or build a stadium, those kinds of capital projects would remain on the town side of the book, so to speak. And the board does meet periodically. I think we heard this morning they meet every 2 weeks on a Monday night. I think we have Penny Ration here tonight from the Board of Education, so she'll maybe handle a question or two later for us. So that's the Board of Education. Very, very important board in this town. So, okay.
And so the boards and commissions cover a lot of diverse areas. We have governance, operations, quality of life, environment, and conservation. And basically, it's the volunteers like you and like me who are responsible for governing this town.
Let me interject right there while you're,
Yes.
when we did this morning at 10 o'clock, so there's some questions came out of that we've incorporated into our presentation. So there are lots of commissions, boards, and committees in town. I counted over 32, 33 this morning. And then the question came up about the membership on the boards. They have to be balanced by a majority party and minority party and things like that. So I did a quick survey, and it looked like unofficially there's about 200 people who are involved in these various boards and committees. And I ran the political affiliation because you have to go by state statute on that and make sure you obey the rules. About 58% were Republicans, 33% Democrats, and 9% unaffiliated. So, and now we're going to get into, I think, 3 or 4 of these to talk about. And Kit will go next.
Yeah. So I think the first commission that I'd like to talk about is the Conservation Commission. And that's a commission that has been coming into its own over the last few years. It's got 5 members, 2-year terms, and it's responsible for the management, protection, and conservation of natural resources. Adding to its portfolio probably will be the pursuit of solar energy for New Canaan. At least that's what our first selectman has been thinking about. Also, they're responsible for reviewing towns' investment in open space and areas like that.
Next, we'll jump to the Park and Rec Commission. I see Sally Campbell, the chair, is with us again tonight. Sally, welcome. Appreciate you being here. The charters, this is a little bit unique in the Park and Rec Commission because they're allowed to have between 7 and 11 members. Usually it's spelled out. It's very specific. You have 8, you have 9, you have 3, but they're allowed to have between 7 and 11 members. They are appointed. They all serve on staggered 3-year terms. What do? They control the usage of the parks. They control the recreational facilities and the activities in the park. Very, very important and very busy schedule that they have. They'll decide, for example, we have an event called Caffeine and Carburetors in town. You may have heard of it, where they gather 200, 300, 400 antique cars, older cars, and then folks come there. Now, okay, who's going to decide, can that go in Waveney Park or should it go downtown? Should it go in the park? When should it go in the park? How often should it go in the park? What are the rules around that? You know, what are the restrictions? And that's what the Park and Rec Commission would do. They're responsible for a lot of things. The usage of all those buildings, for example, in Waveney Park, the Waveney House, the swimming pool, what are the rules around the pool and the membership of the pool, the Lapham Center, the Carriage Barn, the Powerhouse Theater, responsible for all those operations, are working with those people that run those operations. How many people know where Bliss Park is in town? A show of hands. Anybody? I see 1, 2, 3 maybe. Bliss Park is a nature center. Bliss Park was given to us by Susan B. Bliss back in the 60s, I think in 1961. And then the nature center came along and formed and said, maybe we run that park for you. And the town said, sure, you can run that park. So the nature center runs that park under an agreement. I think the date is 1970 something, but they run the park for the town. So again, the Park and Rec Commission would be our interface with the nature center in running that park. And finally, you know, just one other comment. We could go on forever with this, but the Waveney Conservancy is a very, very important group. I hope you know who they are and what they're doing, but they are restoring. They've spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in Waveney Park in private money and restoring that park to its grandeur of what it used to be and keeping it up. So,
I just have to say, I have to plug Park and Rec. It's a great commission. So
you were there and I was there.
yes.
Yeah.
Planning and zoning, and now that is a very powerful commission. 9 members, 3-year terms, and 3 alternates with 2-year terms. And their alternates are very much like, in fact, they are just like the Board of Finances. They, you know, they can speak always, but they can only vote when they're seated, when someone is absent. They control land use issues, development issues, permitting issues, and they report to the state rather than to the town. And So if you think about it, if we as residents here are very, very unhappy about something they're doing, if they have made a final decision, we don't really have any recourse. It goes, if we want to fight that, it's going to have to be in court. We're going to have to litigate because they don't report to the town.
Paying both sides of the legal fees.
Yes, paying both sides, yes. So, and that includes things like when it was being contemplated putting 6 houses over where the Roger Sherman Inn is, that was a big controversial issue. Whether Grace Farms can extend their original charter that came before and still is before planning and zoning. Then also Merritt Apartments, whether that was going to be 160 or 116. And so they also are involved with the use of storefronts, whether stores, whether you could have things like law offices on the ground floor in the center of town, and the answer is you can't. So it's important. What did I forget?
Very good. We'll go on to our last example, and that would be the police department and the fire department. They both have commissions, and this is a little unique. If you think of public works, the public works department reports to the selectmen. The HR department reports to the selectmen. Many of the departments reports straight into the selectmen. The police and fire departments do not. They report to these commissions. They each have a 3-member commission, and there's a new member comes on every year. For every 3 years, you get a new member every year. They manage and supervise the police department and the fire department. Now, let's not say that they do it totally in a vacuum, because there are things that they need to bring to the Board of Selectmen for approval. For example, if they want to hire a new chief, or they want to change some compensation levels, if they want to change rules and regulations, the word in the charter is they have to do it in consultation with the Board of Selectmen. So there is some overlap there from the Board of Selectmen, but it's not individually the first selectman. So, and that wraps up our examples. And
So now we'll turn it over to Krista Cannon, who's going to tell us how it works in real life.
Thank you, Kit. Good evening, and thank you for being here tonight, taking time out of your schedule to learn more about how our town government works and how you can get involved. Tonight, I want to shed some light on how a project goes from an idea to becoming a reality. And as you would imagine, it's all about the money. And the town charter, as we've talked about previously, says that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for reviewing appropriation requests from the different town departments and then forwarding them with recommendations onto the Board of Finance if they are approving them. The Board of Finance then is responsible for, again, approving or denying such requests. And they keep in mind, obviously, the financial components of it. They keep in mind our annual budget, our current operating and capital budget, our current tax rate, our current bonding schedules. And then if it goes through successfully, the Board of Finance, it will come ultimately to the town council. And we are responsible for, again, approving or denying such requests. A point to note is that the town council can only further cut, either approve the recommendation as the Board of Finance brings it to us, or further cut a project, but we cannot add spending to a project. And we approve things, obviously, if money's involved or if town land is involved. For example, if you want to put a cell tower in Irwin Park, that would be an example of a matter that would come to the town council. But I promise you, it's much more dynamic than this. And I'd like to just talk briefly about 3 examples. I'm going to make sweeping generalizations to keep it brief. But the first example I would call straightforward. The second example I would categorize as a bit of back and forth, but ultimately approved. And the third example also with a bit of back and forth, but was not ultimately successful. So the easiest example would be a fire truck. What happens in that scenario? As Tom had mentioned, the fire commission would come to the Board of Selectmen and say, we have a truck, it's run its lifespan, it's 20 years old, we need to replace it. And by the way, the last fire truck we approved was $600,000. And that's why it's very important that it goes through this process, because we're usually talking about very big ticket items. So the fire commission would go to the Board of Selectmen, explain that. The Board of Selectmen, of course, would be on board, send it along to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance would then consider things such as, well, since a fire truck typically lasts 20 years, it's then more appropriate to put it in a 20-year bond versus putting it in other parts of our budget. And then it would come likely to the town council, and we would say, yes, yes, of course, we value public safety, approved. Easy. The next example is a little more complicated. So for those of you that may remember, the Saks expansion project originally started out as just renovation of an auditorium. And once they studied it more, it became apparent that it was going to be a bit more complicated. For example, they had uncovered some hazardous materials in the existing auditorium when they started ripping it up. And then also, it became obvious that crowding was a significant issue for Saks, and that had been an issue that had been brewing for quite some time, and it started to overshadow the project a bit. So the thinking began that if we're going to remove and displace students and classes to do the auditorium, well, we might as well take on the larger renovation at this time and right-size the school, the middle school. That was probably a phrase you might have remembered seeing in the press. And what they meant by right size was that that building was originally constructed to accommodate 1,200 students, and we currently have about 1,400 students in that building. So what started as a discrete project was now blossoming into something much bigger. And this made people nervous, and likely so. There was no obvious path emerging. It was a little bit at a stalemate. Would it move forward? But some traction was then starting. The press started covering it. Town officials started touring the building for themselves to assess the situation for themselves. And most importantly, I believe the tipping point is that the parents, all of you, got involved. You used your voices, you made it clear to the town officials that this was a priority for you and your children. We started to see letters to the editor written by parents. There was a Facebook page devoted to this very cause. And most importantly, people showed up at meetings. And I have to say, for example, at the town council and often on a lot of these other boards and commissions, we always have a public hearing or a public session in the first 10 minutes or so of our meeting. And that means anyone can come and talk about usually the agenda topics, but you can come, make your voices heard. And I'll never forget, there was a Board of Finance meeting that I went to that October that this project was floating out there. And there were 200 parents that came to this room and packed the house, brought their children, and really spoke passionately about this project and how it was important to them. And it was compelling to sit in that room and hear their passionate pleas. And they were so engaged. And I mean, you couldn't go to the food store without someone stopping you saying, well, do you think it's really going to happen? What do you think about it? And it was exciting, really. And ultimately, the town officials listened and respected the fact that doing the larger addition was the right thing for our school district and really all of our citizens. And finally, the locust parking deck is what I would describe as an example with, again, a bit of back and forth, but at the time was not successful. This was a project that had been floating out in the capital budget, and when we look at the budget, we talk about operating and capital. So this was a longer-term project, and it was earmarked for $4 million to build a 2-storied parking deck down in the locust lot. And the locust lot is down the hill next to the left of the post office, if you can imagine. And basically, there were architectural drawings that had been drawn, parking studies had been commissioned and completed, and now the question arose to have funding for construction. So this project was brought, as usual, to the Board of Selectmen. They approved it, but then the Board of Finance did not. So we ask ourselves why. And basically, there were enough members on the Board of Finance, and I can tell you also the town council felt this way at the time, that did not see an immediate need or value for that project. It was positioned at the time as a solution for to provide more parking for town hall employees, potentially shoppers in town. But these were not completely compelling arguments to go spend $4 million because the majority of us believed that a deck specifically in that area of town would not address commuters and commuter parking. And that remained, it was then, and it really remains a priority for many of our town officials. So the Board of Finance just simply didn't approve it, and that was kind of dead in the water at the moment. So I hope that these examples illustrate a little bit of how the groups work together, some of the dynamics, and this is the typical flow, I would say, but I do want to also call out that we see another category of projects, and these are what we call public-private partnerships. You may recall in the press seeing things about the baseball field renovations at Mead Park, the Friends of Mead Park, Waveney Conservancy. And so, for example, the work that is meant to be done down at Mead Park for the baseball fields, that is going to be co-funded equally. I believe it's $500,000 that the Baseball League is going to raise themselves privately, and then town will match that to reconfigure and redo completely the baseball parks at Mead Park. Also, the Friends of Mead Park, which is a new group that's formed, is raising funds to provide additional park features in addition to the actual equipment the town is going to install this season. The Waveney Conservancy, we've mentioned earlier, is a wonderful organization, and they're focusing not necessarily on the house, but on the grounds and the landscaping. They've done a beautiful job. Next time you drive up to the house from South Avenue, you'll notice there's a very majestic walkway now that goes directly up to the house. That they've been responsible for. They've just redone all the cornfields that are gorgeous. They're about to dredge the pond that is at the bottom of the hill where you may take your children sledding in the winter. Believe it or not, there's a gorgeous pond hidden underneath there somewhere. So they're working with that group to make that a priority this year. And then also the Garden Club recently came to us with a project called the Parterre Gardens. And if you're walking out of Waveney, the terrace on the left, there were once beautiful formal gardens there. And so basically, the Garden Club is going to come up with some funds. They have already provided some private funding to bring those gardens back to their original splendor, which we're really excited about. So I think that we'll see more of these kind of projects, the public-private partnership, just because we're in, some lean economic times, and that's a reality, and the more help town can get, why not? We're absolutely open to it. And I just want to make, the last point that, when you are thinking about getting involved, it doesn't just have to be about, a project that needs funding. It could be an idea, or it could really be an awareness campaign, awareness for recycling. I mean, whatever it is that's close to your heart, we're absolutely encouraging people to, come to us with their own ideas and groups that are formed. So Beth's going to take us through a bit of how to really specifically get involved.
Okay, and I will try to make this quick so you can ask me, ask all of us specific questions. But if you want to get involved in town, either in elected positions or on boards and commissions, the first thing to consider is time commitment, how much time you have to spend on it. And any of you that volunteer already know that volunteering can turn into a full-time job really quickly without even trying. But I think the best way to find out what kind of time commitment you're talking about is if there is a specific board or commission, go to their meetings, check their agendas, talk to the members, and say, how much time do you put in to do this? Obviously, you're going to want to do that with a board or commission that you're interested in. I see board and commission members here. Susan Servin is on the historic, and that's her passion, and she's very good at it, and Penny's great at Board of Ed, and Sally's great on Park and Rec, because they're all passionate about those things. And another thing I can tell you about that is they are really giving passionate 200 people on all these boards and commissions. So a great reason to get involved is you meet the nicest people in town and the smartest people in town. So it's a lot of fun.
We're not biased.
Now, some of the boards and commissions, and we didn't talk, there's also elected individuals, like the town clerk and the registrar of voters and the town treasurer, and they require special skills. And Board of Finance obviously requires good financial skills. And so if you have special skills, that's something to consider as you're moving forward. And so I guess everybody knows that elections happen in November. Municipal elections are in the odd years, and state and federal are in the even years. So the best way to get on the ballot or to get appointed is
Next slide.
if you're a member of the party, it makes it a lot easier for you, because most often it is the Republican Town Committee or the Democratic Town Committee that recommends people to the first selectman for boards and commissions because of the makeup, and they will interview you, find out what you're interested in. You can go to either of their websites and just tell them, I'm interested. So that's one way to do it, but we do, as Tom said, have several unaffiliated people on, and if you're an unaffiliated voter and you're interested, it's best probably to go directly to the first selectman or a member of the Board of Selectmen and tell them of your interest, or go to a few of the meetings of the board or commission you're interested in and talk to the chair of the commission and tell them that I'm unaffiliated, but I'm really interested and passionate about this, and when you have an opening, I'd like you to consider me, and they often will. Now, outside of that, there's also ways to get involved in the community without joining the bureaucracy. You can do all sorts of things on your own, like the Friends of Mead Park started this project selling bricks to make the park nicer. I see Robin Bates Mason here. She's got a new group, Planet New Canaan, that's working on some great environmental issues in town. And anybody who has a passion and an interest in something that they think will give back to their community can come forward to, any of the town officials, and we'll try to help facilitate that for you and move you in the right direction. So you have lots and lots of ways to get involved, and I hope some of you are inspired to do that.
Great, so we're going to segue now into questions, and because this is being televised live, what needs to happen is that I need to repeat your question. I know those of us in this room can hear one another, but for the people at home, I'll take your questions and I'll repeat it. Before we start, in case some of you have to step out, I just want to show you this. This is a brochure called Know Your Representatives. The League of Women Voters publishes this every year. It gets mailed to each resident's home. It's generously underwritten by Bankwell, and the reason it's so important is because it contains all of our representatives and their contact information, plus it has voting information. So you can find this online. We have some copies here, and look out for it. We're going to be mailing it out in the next couple of weeks. So with that, questions? Specific questions, yes.
Vicki, can you talk a little bit about the budget process and specifically the timing of the budget process? Because I think that what Krista addressed is very important, but one can't really understand how a project is processed or funded if you don't understand the timing of the budget process.
So the question is, can you talk a little bit about the budget process and the timing? We need to be able to understand that.
We think Tom should also be
Tom.
Excuse me, everyone's pointing to Tom. Excuse me. The budget process, actually, to be honest with you, it's year-round. Excuse me. It comes to a head in November, December. That's when the various town departments, and I believe the Board of Ed, even Penny could speak to this, starts a little bit earlier than that, but November, December, the departments start pulling their budgets together. The Board of Finance put out some instructions this year, said we'd like you to, stay within this range or that range, keep your capital in this level. Then you get through the holidays, and then in January is when it comes to the Finance Department. They pull it all together. They get it into some budget documents, a budget binder, and then it goes to, I say each of the boards. It goes to the Board of Selectmen. That would be late January. It's always about the last week of January. They'll meet 3 or 4 or 5 times on the budget. Then by the 1st February, and this is by charter, the 1st February of the year, Tuesday of February, it has to go be delivered to the Board of Finance. They start their deliberations, and they'll meet 4, 5, or 6 times on the budget through mostly the month of February. And then by the time you get to March, it starts to get over to the town council. This varies every year because you've got winter break and spring break and various holy days and holidays and things you got to work around. But usually by the 1st of April, and it just so happens that next week, the town council will have a public hearing on Tuesday, and then they vote on Thursday, and then that's it. That's final next Thursday. So does that answer your question? Okay.
And then the budget runs from July 1 on for a year.
Yeah, right.
Questions? Yes?
For anybody who's interested in getting involved in a town position or a committee, are there job descriptions or anything formalized on websites that people can look up to see what would be involved or the time commitment?
So the question is, for people interested in getting involved in a town board or commission, is there a place where they can go to read about a job description?
If you want, I'll start that one
Go ahead.
again. There's not one place you can go, but if you go to the town website and you look under commissions and boards and committees, each one of them is listed there. And it'll generally list what their mission is, what they're trying to accomplish, their reason for being, and it'll list the members, and it'll list their meeting schedule for the year and have all their agendas and minutes and such like that. So, but you have to go to each individual one. We're actually working on like one place to go where you could, kind of put that all together in one page, but that's not been accomplished yet.
And as to time commitment, I think that if there's a board or commission that you're interested in and you see someone that you feel you could approach, you could always ask them, what's it about? How long does it take? What are you doing?
And when you ask that question, ask minimum versus what you want to do. Sally, you might back this up. When I was on Park and Rec, I could have easily spent 2 or 3 or 4 days a week, all day long working on it. But how much is the minimum required for you to be a member and take on some responsibilities and go to meetings? That could be a different number. But it could easily, I think Penny laughed before when we said it could be a full-time job. It very quick. If you're building an $18 million school with 12 classrooms and an auditorium, that's a full-time job.
But I think what really happens is people get very invested in what they're doing, and they care, and so they put in time.
It's true.
Well, I would also just say that there's a big difference if you're the chair of a committee versus being on the committee. There is a huge time difference there typically in what is required.
So Penny Ration
Start off.
Penny Ration from the Board of Ed just said that there's a big difference between being, in terms of a time commitment, between being the chair of a committee and a member of a committee. And there is an ebb and flow. I mean, even within a committee, within the Conservation Commission, each member sort of took homework home. And so sometimes some of us had more homework than others. And it can vary. I mean, don't be intimidated thinking that it is a full-time job or that you are going to be doing this four nights a week. That's not always the case. More questions?
So you mentioned that you have a charter that everybody, that the town council complies with. But I was wondering if each commission or each group has its own charter or set of rules, and to what extent do you have to comply with those rules? So for instance, with Grace Farms and the Merritt building or the Merritt Apartments project, there were rules that the Planning and Zoning Board needed to comply with, but then they made exceptions on a number of situations. How often do exceptions like that happen?
Okay, so the question is, we've heard about the town charter, but does each board or commission have its own charter, its own rules to which it has to adhere? And the example given was the planning and zoning with Merritt, with Grace Farms. There have been exceptions, so we don't know. Your question is, to what extent do they have to follow the rules exactly, and how much leeway is there for exceptions? Kristen,
Go ahead.
you wanna-
Well, I'll start, yeah, but you'll correct,
Go ahead.
okay? I think P and Z is a tricky one because, again, like we mentioned with the Board of Ed, they derive their power from the state. P and Z has a very elaborate set of rules and regulations that are in addition to the charter. The charter, if you ever read it, it's more a loose framework. So the charter says things like the town council shall have 12 members that have 4-year terms, and we are responsible for appropriations and anything to do with land. That's all it says. And then we could then, town council, write a whole, list of other things that we're responsible for. And P and Z is so detailed because it's just so technical by nature. And they make exceptions based on the applications that come before them when they see that it's appropriate. And, for better or for worse, there's not much that, we, as the other governing bodies, can do about that, right?
Just to try to answer your question, yeah, some do, some don't. The town council has rules. You've adopted rules. It's 4 or 5 pages of rules. It's reviewed periodically. I'm sure the Board of Education has some bylaws and rules that they go by. The audit committee actually is controlled by an ordinance. There's actually an ordinance that was passed around the audit committee. You take the Deer committee, I doubt that they have rules to go by. I mean, they have a very narrow focus. I'm chairman of the 4th of July committee, the Family 4th Fireworks Committee. We don't have rules. Our job is to put on a fantastic show for you every year, and we try to do that. So the answer is, some do, some don't. The more important ones, I think, do have bylaws and rules that they go by, and they're reviewed periodically. P&Z is one that has, I think, a massive set of rules that they go by.
More questions? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, and I was going to say, and then there's also zoning board of appeals. And so if you're looking for an exception to a zoning rule, then you go before the zoning board of appeals. And I think that where some of the things might have had to go before the zoning board of appeals, they figured out ways to get them in front of planning and zoning instead. So there's some room that gets taken care of in there.
More questions?
What role, or are there term limits for some, all, none of these boards?
None.
Are there term limits for some or all, none of these
None.
commissions?
I don't think there's term limits for any, are there?
I'm not aware of any. We had a town treasurer for, 46 or 48 years?
Almost
That was an
made
elected.
50,
That was
yeah.
elected position.
Okay, so how does that work? I mean, if there are no term limits,
You die.
this has come up, yeah, you die. This has come up, though, the question of, so what happens, if do people burn out, or people ever asked to step
Well,
down?
Yeah, when their terms are up, they sometimes say, I don't want to be reappointed.
Yeah.
So you look for someone new to take their place. Sometimes they're moving or something else happens and they don't even wait till the end of their term. And sometimes people stay so long that the Board of Selectmen has to decide, I don't
Okay.
think you're doing the job as well as somebody else could at this point, so we are not reappointing you
And,
to
and,
this
and that's
position.
happened. I mean,
And
first
it
of all,
does.
there's the elected ones. All right, you decide what their term is. That's easy. And then on the appointed ones, man, we've got people on the Board of Finance for 14 or 16 years. Very, very valuable people. They're great people. Do you want to see them leave? No. But, at some point, they do give up the ghost. But as Beth pointed out, and recently, there's some folks that have been around a very long time. You have to be reappointed based on the term. The Board of Selectmen has to reappoint you. If they decide not to reappoint you and pick someone else, an up-and-coming person, then so be it. Then you're pushed aside in a way. And that's happened.
But if you're elected, and you can keep getting elected, you can do it forever. However, the terms of the Board of Selectmen are 2 years, because I think everyone has in mind to get rid of them quickly.
More questions?
Good question.
Yeah.
For the boards and the commissions, if we were to look on the website and they list the number of people on those boards and commissions, does it also list when their terms are up?
So the question is, for the boards and commissions, if you go on the website to see the list of people on the boards and commissions, does it list when their terms are up?
Is it in your
I don't think
brochure?
it does.
It does not on the town info website. It doesn't tell you on most of, they finally started, I think, putting the affiliations on a lot of them, but it does not have a term, because as a DTC chair, Democratic Town Committee Chair, we were trying to look and see who was coming up when and what we had, and it did not say when their term expired. But you do know that, like, for, 9-member, 3-year term, 3 of them are up every year. So you just don't know which ones without checking.
Right, but if you're trying to inspire new people in the community to get involved in the process.
If you're trying to inspire new people in the community to get involved in the process, and the question is, how do those people find out when someone's term is up so that they might throw in their hat? And actually, I mean, Beth, you would know, the RTC would know, and Tom, you know everything.
We have,
Everybody just calls Tom for everything, but you actually do know.
but in terms of both the RTC and the DTC, we like to keep a bench going. So we interview people all the time, not just when there's an opening, and say, well, what are you interested in? Well, if you're just interested in serving, would you be interested in maybe the youth sports committee, but if they don't have something and something opens on the park and rec, would you be interested? And we will contact them as soon as we find there is an opening and say, well, can we put your name forward? Do you want to do it? So that's why the 2 town committees have an edge over, because they also notify us when somebody is resigning or doesn't want to be reappointed. So,
That's a nepotism process, right? I mean, it might not be formal nepotism as in familial relation, but the point is, you know somebody who expresses to you personally that they're interested in serving, so you have it in the back of your head. So when you hear something comes up, you're going to utilize that information. So if somebody like myself, and I'm not suggesting I have interest in serving, so do not take this conversation too far. But if there is a person in the town who wants to serve or is thinking about it, who is not connected into the RNC or the Democratic, they're at a competitive disadvantage by definition from the way you just described.
So the comment, the comment was that people who are not connected to the RTC or DTC are at a disadvantage if they want to serve, that there's a kind of nepotism there because the RTC and DTC, are aware of people.
well, I think that's part of why we're doing this tonight, because it's really you being aware of where to go. It's not nepotism from my point of view, because I'm meeting new people all the time. It's not people I know. I'm not reaching out to, my neighbor and my best friend or this one wants to do this. It's people who are interested. It's those 2 chairs that you should start with, and then the chairs of the commissions. It's not people we know that we reach out to. It's people that come to us and say, we're interested.
Anybody can you go back to that slide actually that has the RTC and DTC email? Because
They're also
kinda
on
small.
the League
And they're
of Women
also
Voters.
on this. Anybody can email them and just say, I'm interested.
I think
Let
that
me
Krista-
add to that. I think, nepotism sounds like a negative word. But but I think that you're right to say, there is a formal process if you are a D or an R, meaning that there are 2 formal organizations. There's the DTC and the RTC. And if you do approach them, whether you're best friends with anyone here or not, your name will be floated. You will be given the same opportunity to be interviewed and considered for any position. And I think what's also important to know is that 30% of our town are unaffiliates, and that's probably just going to keep going up. It's a huge trend in our town, in our state, and nationwide. And, you know, on a real positive note, we made this point this morning. For example, town council, 12 members, 8 Republicans, 4 Democrats, because you can't have more than a majority. And there has never been an issue that we voted on that was down the line, ever, because everyone wants a good school, everyone wants a place to park when they shop, and that's what's great about it. And I mean, often you're not even thinking, oh, D's and R's. And so recently on the town council, a spot came up because we had a member move out of town that we had to fill. And I have to say, that was the first time that I saw the parties at play, because I was in the school of thought of, oh, maybe this is an opportunity to engage some of that 30% and get an unaffiliate involved. And you started to see kind of the land grab that was going on. So, you know, no one wants to give up a seat. Why do we want to go 8-7 or 4-3? And that's fair. There is a vehicle in terms of if you are an unaffiliate, which there are so many, you can reach out formally to our first selectman, and he'll meet with you and just say, here's my resume, and I'm interested in parking, Parks and Rec, and the fireworks committee. And he'll keep it, you know, on hand, and you will be considered. Recently, there was an unaffiliate who was just appointed to the Board of Finance recently, so, you know, it is done. But I think, too, you know, I was, in all openness and candidness, I was unaffiliated before I became involved a few years ago in politics, and I consider myself a moderate Republican. I'm extremely fiscally conservative. I don't believe in big government, but I'm very socially liberal, and I could have tried to run as you. I don't know that I would have been successful. So, you know, if you can pick a team, it will probably help just in terms of ease of process, if that helps.
Back to the original question, or is this information out there? That goes back to that one page I hope that we can get up there that shows all the groups and who's serving and what their term is. It's a matter of resources, really. There's no one really assigned to. This happens in the first selectman's office by our administrative assistant, and you know it's constantly changing. That list is constantly changing, and it's hard enough just to keep the list straight, get it on an agenda, get it in the minutes, get everybody sworn in, and sign all the paperwork, and then you got to go post the website too. It's just a matter of resources, really.
One more question. We have time for one more. Valerie, can you go to the last slide? I just want to call your attention to the League's website. The League of Women Voters website has this document, the Know Your Representatives, with all the contact information for all our reps. There's a lot of other information on there, and especially a link for registering to vote. If you are not registered to vote, you need to register to vote. And you can actually do this online. You can do it through our website. Also, if you ever have an idea for a study, an event, a group, if you have a question about town government, state government, any kind of government, reach out to us. We're happy to help. Anybody else have?
Or call Tom.
Or call Tom. Call Tom Stadler.
Thanks so much for coming
Thank you
out.
all for coming out. Thank you very much.